Be wary of friends. They will betray you more quickly.
An airline ticket from the Scatino bus stop. Tony made the guy order blocks of these things through the sporting goods store.
For they are easily aroused to envy.
Being at the top, he's isolated himself.
Yeah, it's just him and his money.
They also become spoiled and tyrannical.
He could get us all killed with New York, and him, Tony has to think about what to do with him now. After all this shit. Me, he don't need to fucking think.
But hire a former enemy and he will be more loyal than a friend because he has more to prove.
To the victor belongs the spoils.
In fact, you have more to fear from friends than from enemies. If you have no enemies, find a way to make them. Now, Tony will never really have a problem with that last part. In fact, the one time he thought he had none,
Richie April's in the Bermuda Triangle. All my enemies are smoked.
it was immediately followed by a laugh from someone who he realizes later in the episode is an informant, and the entrance of someone who, at the beginning of the next episode, will be in his backyard considering shooting him. But in this episode on Bully Whispers, we will take a closer look at how the second law of power, never put too much trust in friends, learn how to use enemies, plays out in The Sopranos. In doing so, we will be focusing primarily on Tony's handling of his affairs, especially in relation to Christopher, Feech LaManna, Tony B, and Paulie Walnuts, although Johnny Sack may provide an excellent example of the law in action at the end. In giving an example of someone who violated the law, Greene cites mid-9th century Byzantine Emperor Michael III. Michael became emperor when his uncle Bardas had his mother banished, her lover killed, and Michael put on the throne under the impression he could control the young ruler. But despite the fact that most people advised him to make Bardas his chief counselor because he understood the job, Michael chose his friend Basilius, who had no real qualifications. Michael fast-tracked Basilius up the ladder, continually gave him money, and even had his uncle Bardas killed because of Basilius's influence. Eventually, Michael ran into some financial troubles of his own, and when he asked Basilius to repay some of the loans he had been given, he received a very disrespectful no as a response.
Bye, Felicia.
In that moment, he realized he had created a monster. Basilius now had more money and connections than he did. Soon after, Basilius had Michael killed and installed himself as emperor. The most superficially obvious parallel, even though he never killed Tony, is Christopher, although there are others. Chris, just like Basilius, moved quickly up the ladder despite having no real qualifications for the job, just a close relationship with the boss. But the real significance here is the reason why Basilius was so willing to abandon Michael. According to Greene, when people rise in such a manner, they often feel encumbered by the debt of the charity and choose to forget, acting as though they had earned it themselves. We certainly see some of that encumberment by debt when it comes to Tony and Tony B.
Because I'm sick of you leaning on this cousin thing and that bad hijack like you could do whatever the fuck it is you want to do because you went away that night and I didn't.
You're the one who keeps bringing that up. I'm fine with it.
But when it comes to Chris, the more relevant aspect is the choosing to forget. While Chris does occasionally and in a general sense acknowledge Tony's role, we see him consistently choose to forget when he is agitated about something.
What does Tony B have on this guy?
And I'm supposed to maybe take a bullet for this, Keith.
Draw your uncle's down for you? I need to get into specifics.
Greene also points out how Michael could have killed Basilius immediately after he realized the problem, but didn't because he didn't believe his friend would betray him. And we see Tony do this with Big Pussy. Rather than acknowledging the new reality he was presented with, Tony looked for reasons for it not to be true because he didn't want to believe that his friend would betray him. Unlike with Big Pussy, with Feech, Tony acted swiftly in removing the threat, although he didn't kill him as Greene would have suggested in the previous example. Instead, he acted like the example given of a leader who followed Law 2, Emperor Sung of China. For centuries after the fall of the Han Dynasty, China had nothing but coups happening one after the other. The army would take over, a general would become emperor and kill the other generals, and a few years later it would happen again. So when Emperor Sung took the throne, he decided to try something different. Rather than kill off the other generals like everyone else, he let them retire in luxury, with all of the entertainment and women they desired. Now, Tony could never let Feech retire like that, but he also recognized that Feech was respected, and that killing him might breed some resentment in the rank and file, similar to how killing generals would in an army. In getting him sent back to jail, Tony did the closest thing he could to letting Feech retire, although he did basically just rat him out. Let me know down in the comments if you think that was a snitch move by Tony. The real reason Sung chose this new strategy is because he understood that friends expect more and get jealous more easily, whereas enemies, especially those who expected death and were spared, tend to be more grateful and prove more loyal in the end. With Christopher, we certainly see the entitlement and jealousy.
And here we are again. Tony B goes wrong, and Tony lays a $200K a year cash cow on him.
But we don't see the gratitude that supposedly comes from being spared a death sentence, which he was multiple times. In this instance, I think that's because Chris never really realized how close he was to being killed, even when Tony had the gun to his face. A better example, and one that's fairly similar to the historical reference used, was when Tony took Paulie out on his boat. When Emperor Sung discovered a plot that a noble had hatched against him, rather than kill him, he was invited to the palace, honored, and sent home with a package to be opened when he was halfway there. The package contained documentation showing that Sung knew of the conspiracy, but let him live anyway. Similarly, when Tony took Paulie out on the boat, he let Paulie know that he knew who told Johnny Sack about the joke, and Paulie was worried about being killed, but he wasn't. One of the key reasons that Greene points to as to why it is different working with friends is that working relationships requires some degree of distance to allow for accountability, and working with friends blurs those lines. Through people such as Big Pussy, Tony B, and Christopher, Tony shows us that he is not as good at defining those lines as someone like Carmine Sr., who had no problem letting his son stay down in Miami and not naming him successor. By comparison, Tony drags his heroin-addicted nephew up the ladder kicking and screaming. Robert Greene does offer an exception to this in the reversal of the law section, and that is, it's generally best not to work with friends unless dirty work needs to be done and the boss doesn't want to be associated with it, which fits the mafia to a T. In this case, not only are they more likely to do it, if things go wrong, they make a more believable scapegoat. However, you can only play that card once before you lose that friend forever, so for that reason, Greene recommends using someone who's close, but not too close. Either way, that's irrelevant in this case because Tony never tried to make Chris into a sacrificial lamb like he did with Junior. But that just might be what Johnny Sack was trying to do with him. When Johnny Sack asks Tony to kill Carmine Sr., he claims he can make it alright with the other families, which personally I doubt he could even if he wanted to. But what if he was just setting up Tony like the fan theory speculates? If that were the case, Johnny chose the perfect target in Tony according to this aspect of the second law. He was close enough that if he blamed Tony, people would be less likely to think he made it up, but not so close to Tony that he would be greatly affected if Tony were to be killed. When it comes to Robert Greene's second law of power, Tony does a terrible job of following the rules, mostly due to his inability to separate relationships. Even when he does follow the rules, like with Bobby Baccala, it's by accident, not by design. For those of you who made it to the end, I have a couple of questions for you before I sign off. I'm currently lining up both my first Michael Corleone episode and my first Boardwalk Empire episode. As for the Michael Corleone episode, would you like the first one to be a Machiavellian Monday, a general character overview, a certain question looked at, or something else entirely? As for the Boardwalk Empire episode, I've decided the first one will be on either Jimmy Darmondy or Gyp Rossetti, so I'd be curious to hear your thoughts down in the comments section, and keep an eye out for the polls that'll be coming out in the next week or two. Well, thanks for watching this episode here on Bully Whispers. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you at the next score.